Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 1 of Blueshift Engage. I'm Vijay Chittoor, co-founder and CEO of Blueshift. First up, I want to acknowledge that these are difficult times for so many people around the world. I hope you're all staying safe. Our own teams at Blueshift have been working from home, and I imagine nearly all of you are as well. That is why we made this inaugural Engage event very WFH friendly, just 1 hour a day from the comfort of your homes. Our goal with Blueshift Engage is to provide a forum where marketers can learn about the future of customer engagement from those who are already living it. We have some great speakers lined up over the next few days, and I encourage you to join all the sessions if you can. Some quick housekeeping notes. If you have questions for the speakers at any point in the session, simply submit them using the Zoom Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will also be active on Twitter during all the sessions, hashtag #BlueshiftEngage. And finally, we have a daily Uber Eats giveaway that we'll be announcing at the end. Also, a quick note of appreciation for our sponsors, all of whom are Blueshift partners. I encourage you to check them all out. I'm calling it today from my home in San Francisco, grabbing my morning coffee. But I know that we have attendees joining from all over the world. While we were waiting to start, we had a chance to do a quick icebreaker poll. Let's take a look at where everyone is calling it from. Okay, great. Looks like it's morning for 42% of people. That's good. We did not wake up most of you at a funny hour. Noon for about 38. That's great. And then 6% of people, it's getting late, almost time for bed. So thank you all for those of you who are joining us at a crazy hour. We really appreciate it, and we hope we can make this a truly engaging session and make this worth your time. Now, all of that brings me to our first speaker today, Anthemos or Ant. He's the co-founder and CEO of Zumper, a company whose mission is to make renting an apartment as easy as booking a hotel. That sounds difficult. We'll learn more about that from Ant. Now, Zumper has over 200 employees, has raised $150 million in venture capital. They've been a great partner with Blueshift. We have worked with them for about 3 years now, and I'm grateful for the partnership. And I'm really grateful to Ant for taking out the time today to speak with our community. I think he has a lot to offer to everyone here, so I'm super excited to speak with him. I'm also grateful that the team at Zumper has very kindly shared their experience with Blueshift in a case study. And everyone on this in the session can find the link to the case study in the chat section. So please check that out if you have the time. Just one final profile nugget about Ant. He and I share a common alma mater in Harvard Business School, but I can promise that everything we'll be talking about today will be what they do not teach you at Harvard Business School. So in today's session, we'll explore how marketers can understand what's on CEO's mind, how they can partner better to drive growth in good times and bad. I think it's a very rare opportunity for marketers in our community to understand how a high growth CEO thinks about building their growth engine. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. I'm looking forward to learning a lot from Ant. So with that, let's begin. Before we get into everything else, and just kick us off by telling us a little bit about how you are dealing with this pandemic. How has the lockdown affected you? Are you binge watching something on Netflix? I know you have like a 2.5-year-old son. How has that experience been?
Hi, Vijay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So Zumper went to work from home pretty quickly. We weren't the first company to go to shelter in place, but we were pretty early in March. So it's been almost 2 months now. I mean, the upside of this, to put the silver lining on, is like I've never spent this much time with my son. I've had breakfast, lunch, and dinner with him for 2 months, and as many of you on the call know, like balancing family stuff at home has been difficult, but there's upside to actually spending so much more time. In terms of my team, I think a lot about them, Vijay, as I'm sure you guys do at Blueshift, of the mental health, especially of some of the younger folks who live with roommates that they don't like, or who live on their own and have really been sheltering and so haven't really seen human beings for 2 months. They're the ones I worry about the most. There are some great mental health apps out there that we've got free access to, and we've sent a bunch of resources, but I think we're going to be in this for a while. And I worry most about like the more junior members of the team who maybe don't have kind of the family connection around them.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I'm glad you found the silver lining in spending time with your son. I have a 3.5-year-old myself, and I can fully relate to that. Now, let's talk a little bit about Zumper. You guys, obviously have built a marketplace, and I think your mission is to almost have that, if I understand right, have that book button for renting an apartment, right? And everyone talks about how difficult it is to build a successful marketplace, a two-sided marketplace. So that is difficult by itself. And then on top of that, I think the internet is, much easier for simple transactions, low value transactions. And you guys are taking on the big challenge, big hairy problem of taking a big considered purchase like an apartment search and bringing that entirely online, right? Not just sort of like just a search resource, but trying to complete that entire journey through your tools. So talk to us about how you tackle these two hairy problems at the same time. How has that journey been? What have been the big learnings for you along the way?
Yeah, so the origins for Zumper began kind of when I was an undergrad in the UK. I'm also in San Francisco now, when I couldn't actually rent apartments digitally. And this was back in like 2002, as hotel sites were coming online. It seemed crazy that you couldn't rent a flat or an apartment using e-commerce and book buttons. And I always thought someone would build that. And then nobody did. And so when I was at grad school in the US, I got to the point where I'd had 7 horrible apartment moves in my 20s. And I'd always found search was difficult, but it was actually getting the apartment that was the most frustrating, because it seemed to be done offline, behind the scenes, with no transparency, even though you spend a third of your income on your apartment rental. And so that's why Zumper's mission was to make renting an apartment as easy as booking a hotel. So Vijay, to your point, we're 7 years old and it's taken 2 phases to get this far, and we still feel like we're just starting. So phase 1 was just to build platform liquidity. How can you get renters searching on Zumper, whether they could book or not, just to use us as a search engine? And marketplace liquidity, as many of you know, takes several years. And what felt like, it might take a couple of years, took 4 or 5 to really get into like 10, then 20, then 50, then 80 million people using us a year. That took a really long time. And so phase 1 of the company was just get Zumper into Americans' heads as a core apartment search brand. And only in the last year and a half have we really gone after part 2, which is at the bottom of our funnel, which is don't just help renters search on a subset of our inventory, help them actually pre-qualify and then book those apartments, whether they stand in an open house, pull out their phone and pre-qualify and send kind of a deposit, or whether they go see an open house and then they go home and like fully submit their application online through Zumper. Phase 1 is kind of achieved. I think we're now the largest privately held company in the US for apartment search. Phase 2, which is build e-commerce for apartment rentals. 7 years in, I feel like we're just getting started.
That's a great time to be. So tell us, I mean, I think all of us at some point in time have gone search for an apartment and, maybe, booked it up obviously through the traditional methods. Now, tell me a little bit about like the customer journey in the space, right? So are you talking about sort of how long? I'm guessing a lot of people who are looking for apartments start their research pretty early on, and they're spending a bunch of time researching things before they get to that transaction. So how long is that cycle in the customer's mind, and how do you map that to your business?
Yeah, and we've done some great work using Blueshift actually around this. Most customers start looking 3 to 6 months before they'll move. So right now, even though there's shelter in place in most of the US, we see a lot of renters searching ahead of their kind of summer move. So actually our traffic's back up year on year now, which it hasn't been for the last 4 weeks for obvious reasons. So typically the customer journey for the renter starts 3 to 6 months before their move. And then in the duration where they've actually decided to pull the trigger and go and visit open houses and make appointments to go see things, it's a 30 to 45 day window. And so kind of phase 1, which is research based, is much more kind of, it's slower, it's passive. We don't surface stuff imminently all the time. But when they're in phase 2, and we actually use Blueshift to identify phase 2, when they're actually in market sending messages to landlords, if you can surface 10 actionable insights a day. So for example, hey, these 10 new properties just came online in these minutes on this day, and they fit your search parameters of within your price range, within the zip code you're looking in. we can actually surface 10 emails a day or 10 push notifications a day to our renters, but only in phase 2 when they're really in search mode, because it's one of those things that you only do every 3 years as a renter. And so when you're in search mode, you can engage them a lot. When they're not in search mode, obviously you can't do that.
That's exactly right. So I think, you are setting out to disrupt an industry which has primarily been offline. People have done these searches through brokers, and there are a lot of downsides to brokers, which is why you're disrupting the space. But the upside of broker human is they kind of get to know me as a person. They kind of know that I'm looking for 2-bedroom apartment, not 3. I'm looking for certain layouts. I'm looking for maybe these 2 zip codes are fine, but that one is not. So how do you sort of when you sort of build out a platform which is entirely digital? What do you use to replace that element? Because that's pretty critical to me as a customer. And how do you substitute for that in your digital customer experience?
Yeah, totally. And this is where look, it is hard to replace a human being, but this is where machine learning and AI can really come to force. So obviously, people always use Netflix as a good example of hey, you watch these 3 programs and then we're going to recommend these 4. You know what, randomly, Vijay, and I don't know if your audience have felt the same, I feel like Netflix still doesn't understand me at all. It's the craziest shows for me based on what I've watched. So I like the idea of what Netflix is supposed to be, and obviously it's been a very successful company, but I think their algorithm itself still isn't perfect. I mean, what's beautiful about ML and AI is it's purely objective. And so there are patterns we can recognize when a user is using Zumper's website or our apps, and then using Blueshift then to combine it with then how we retarget them, not just what kinds of listing, but at what times of day we go to them. Actually, that's where machine learning can understand a renter better than a human being can, because we can understand nuances in their behavior that you just can't get through human interaction. So, I think machine learning and artificial intelligence are words that are thrown around in Silicon Valley and tech hubs across the world where people don't fully understand what they mean. But this is a great example where we understand a renter's behavior by every click gesture they make on the site, by every second of every day they engage with one of our push notifications and emails, and every single one of our renters. And, we send 50 million emails a month. We're used by 80 million people a year. So we have a pretty good corpus of data. I think we understand our renters way better than we possibly could through human interaction.
No, that's fascinating. I think, and in some ways, I think what the insight that I'm getting out of this is you are, in some ways you talked a lot about email push, which many people think of as just marketing, but essentially in your case, it's actually the core customer experience. You're actually delivering the value that you would deliver in your product through these channels like email, through push, through other traditional marketing channels, maybe paid media. Was that a conscious choice? Was that just something that just came naturally to you, or did you have to think about that? And how did that influence sort of how you built out your team?
Yeah, so I mean, my CFO made this comment about our pitch decks for fundraising, where he said our pitch decks are an extension of our product. When you go fundraise, as we've all done in Silicon Valley to fund our companies, your pitch deck has to look like your product, and it needs to feel like an extension of your brand. Actually, email and push are no different. Email and push are the product. Just because they're not hosted on the URL or in the App Store or the Play Store. Actually, our email notifications to send 50 million a month, it is the single biggest entry point into Zumper's product now, is through our email. And so we stumbled into that. We used to kind of send stupid alerts where if you send an alert up at 7 p.m. on one day, we'd send you the same, we send you recommended listings at 7 p.m. on the same device for the next infinite number of days. And obviously that's not the best way to do this, because that could have been a fluke that someone sent it at 7. But when you get good at this, email and push are your product. I think traditionally marketing and growth have thought of these as extensions or completely separate identities where they're hacks to bring in users and then the product does its thing. Absolutely not. Push and email for us are they are the product. And increasingly you're going to say advances in actually using emails, for example, to actually consummate transactions in the email instead of bring people back to the product itself. So we started seeing them as different things and as growth hacks to bring people into the top of our funnel. They're now the same thing as our product.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. I think, later on in Blueshift Engage, in the rest of the week, we have speakers from Udacity, speakers from Tuft and Needle. Again, people who are bringing sort of an offline experience, either sort of learning from a teacher or buying a mattress in a store, or like they're trying to bring that online. And really, I think in some form that digital transformation is going to affect all of us. And as that happens, I think it's pretty important for all of us to embrace this idea that marketing is no longer this idea of like a billboard ad or something that's disconnected from what's going to happen in the product. It's really about taking elements of the product, distributing that on channels which are outside the product or the core experience. I think, and swap out the word product for customer experience, if you will. I would imagine tomorrow's bank really sort of looks at my banking transactions, my sort of engagement with the bank as a product, and uses that to engage me back. So that's a very interesting theme. Let me ask you a little bit about, I think you mentioned your CFO. I want to ask about that for a little bit, and there are some interesting CFO related angles that I want to explore with you. But talk to me about what kind of skill sets you look for as you were staffing sort of your quote unquote marketing team. And I don't even know if you call them a marketing team or if you call them a growth team or a product team. So talk about sort of how did you find those people? How did you make sure they were fully embedded within that customer experience? What was that process like?
Yes, so first of all, actually, just to make your point, our office is set up to embody the point you just mentioned, that like our growth team, which is what we call them, our design team and our product team sit together. They sit on one corner of our office. And even though they have separate departments, they're pretty much working on the same problem. So in terms of org design and even the structure of our office, growth, design, and product are the same thing. And they're very consciously sat together. So I completely agree with that point. Our platform is all about marketplace liquidity. We needed like landlords to come onto the platform to bring renters onto the platform, that then brought more landlords, that then brought more renters. So this organic kind of marketplace liquidity that takes years to bring together. Consequently, we brought very heavy quant onto the team early. So we were a very organic, quant-driven shop around marketplace liquidity before we actually got into any of the smart kind of marketing or growth tactics within the funnel. And so actually, our head of growth, and who's now our chief growth officer, is an ex-investment banker. So heavy numbers focused to get the liquidity off the ground and actually get the platform seeding itself before we then got really good at re-engagement and content marketing. And Zumper is far stronger on the growth side. We only actually have 2 people working on what most people would say is traditional marketing, which is kind of product or brand marketing. Because we're kind of an infrequent purchase, we've always been much more on the kind of growth and content marketing side to get people to know our brand. Even if they're moving in 3 years' time, we don't have these instant ROIs from kind of ad spend. And so 90% of our growth team that sustains 80 million users a year is kind of quantitative growth. And we actually only have 2 people who I'd classify as like very clearly outside the quant side and in the more qualitative build the brand. Now, that is probably short-sighted. I wish we had more here. And I think that's the area of investment which will get us to the next level. But to get to this level for a 2-sided marketplace, it's too luxurious to have a brand over here if you haven't delivered marketplace liquidity over here. And to deliver marketplace liquidity required forensic data science and testing of kind of when markets tipped to like having a great value prop to renters. And so we skewed pretty heavily to that side to kick off with. And so consequently, our team is called the growth team. Even though marketing is a subset of it, it's called the growth team. And we don't mean growth as pre-funnel or mid-funnel. Growth to us is kind of quantitative marketing, which for many 2-sided marketplaces is like the right focus to seed them.
Yeah, no, I think that's fascinating. And I think with that, you mentioned how you feel now that you might be underinvested in certain areas. And I want to actually talk about the evolution of this, because I think, when I talk to some CEOs and CMOs, I often, I'd love to understand how they think about things like payback periods, building a brand, what are some activities that are high, not just high ROI, but also payback immediately so that you can fuel that growth machine with dollars and paid media, right? And I think that equation changes over time, because things which were sort of short payback become longer payback at a different cycle in the company's evolution and so on. So I'd love to, I think, maybe tie a couple of themes that you have been talking about. I think you mentioned obviously your CFO in the context of your slide deck, but I would love to see the CFO's point of view on everything that you're doing in marketing, including the kind of places where you're allocating headcount and sort of and paid dollars. And also, as you think about sort of the next evolution, you might start investing more in brand. How do you think that changes the equation? What advantages do you have now in spending more on brand and sort of the traditional marketing that you did not have maybe 3 or 4 years ago?
So good questions. As a privately held company that still isn't as big as like the Zillows and the CoStars of the world, who have a combined market cap of like $30 billion, who are our competition, we have to do kind of positive ROAS or positive ROI marketing, and we keep like very narrow parameters. We talk about single session optimization, that can we buy traffic that converts in the first session as our bar, because sometimes it's when people are moving 6 months out, it's actually quite a kind of hard to track that through, and we can, but it makes LTVs really unpredictable. So where our bar is really high, we actually try and optimize like a profitable single session of a click, and only 9% of our traffic is paid. The other 91% is organic. So it's not our core focus, but when we have it, that 9% is either break even or profitable in its first session. So meaning we buy a downloader or a renter online who comes into the product and sends messages to monetizable listings. And we have a really high bar that even though we can track them afterwards, we want them to be at least break even in the first session. So if we had more capital, we wouldn't do that. We'd absolutely be fine to have like multiple session attribution. But especially during COVID, where we've, obviously been careful with our marketing budget, we've raised the bar so that we know that at the very least our marketing is break even. In terms of brand, it's an interesting one. So I think it's really hard to build a brand in an infrequent marketplace. We're not Uber or Instacart, where tomorrow you can use the product. And so some of our competitors spend $10 million a month on like TV ads. Apartments.com specifically in our vertical spend 10 million a month on advertising on television. We just cannot compete with that. And so we've tried to win in terms of brands on content marketing. So instead of buying billboards or TV, we've tried to position Zumper as an expert on rental data. So whenever you read any rental report of like LA rents are kind of crazy this month, in most of the times it's Zumper's data. And even though it doesn't tell our product story, it tries to position us as a thought leader or an objective source of truth in rental data. And it's not as great as like shouting about your brand and telling our story, but it is a good growth hack in terms of an organic distribution, where we get about 60 press articles a week just talking about Zumper's rent data in every town in the US. So brand is the single least investment we have at Zumper, just because to build a brand in an infrequent marketplace, you have to be spending like several $1 million a month, which we just can't do yet.
Very cool. No, I think that's very, very interesting. And I think there are quite a few follow-up questions that come to my mind. But maybe the first one is, I think that maybe that's more of a comment than question, but I think you have framework in your mind, which you have then applied to your category, which is infrequent purchases, but many of the attendees are infrequent purchase businesses. But I think the framework still applies. You're trying to figure out sort of when do you break even on that first investment essentially. And in your case, you're kind of break even on the first click. And for many others, that might not be the case. They might have like more of an LTV modeling. And really, I think the comment and what I'm really, gleaning from this is, as a marketer, you need to start understanding this is how your CEO is thinking, this is how kind of your CFO is thinking, and align your marketing strategies towards that. The second one is definitely a question more than a comment. I think you guys have some great data. You have published some great reports. I think I've definitely come across your rental guides. So talk to us a little bit more about content marketing and how you've turned your own data to your advantage, because that's another way of like leveraging your own product for your marketing. So touch on that for a second.
Yes. We get about 200 to 250 content pieces a month. And basically through engineering, we built like kind of a sophisticated mail merge of an ability to contact every US journalist who's relevant in the space using our data. So our data science team have built a model that spits out rent trends for every single city, town, village, and zip code in the US every single month. It kind of spits out a histogram of like, here are the rent prices in this geo. Here's the trend up and down. And then Crystal on our team works with journalists to kind of farm that out. So it's basically applying a growth mindset to content marketing, where we don't have the time, sadly, to curate data specifically to West Palm Beach in Florida, but we do have a programmatic way to spit out their histogram and then to go and actually engage them on it and to do an interview. So content marketing has been this wonderful opportunity to place your brand in front of people without showing off about it. But given our growth team has 12 people, so it's still pretty small, it has to be programmatic. So it's very much, it's not even 80-20, it's kind of 95-5. 95% of the work is programmatic and 5% is human, but it has this kind of outsized impact. And in terms of like the way I work with the team, to your first point, I used to be quite like a lagging indicator person, where it's like, obviously all the work we do is like to spit out like, 8 million people will use Zumper this month. And like, they're the numbers that the board care about, which are the lagging indicators. But I think good growth and marketing teams and their CEOs start to work on like the leading indicators. Cause like, yeah, we'll do 12 million users in summer if we get the leading stuff right, as you guys all know. So I spend far more time now talking to our chief growth officer about the leading metrics, and far less time talking about the outputs, which are kind of vanity at this stage, because if you get the leading things right, this stuff will flow. So in terms of leading indicators, SEO positions, a classic leading indicator. Like if we climb the rankings, we might not see the traffic for the next 30 days, but I know for sure that being a 3 rank higher in SEO will have a big impact downstream eventually. Same on click-through rates, same on tailoring our engagements to renters and showing like a higher NPS. So I think over time, I've become a CEO who's like very vain about the outputs, to actually really not caring too much about the outputs and just being annoying about the leading indicators up top. And that's how we start every single growth meeting now. We don't talk about the traffic and the MAUs or the number of leads. We don't even talk about revenue. They come once a month. We just talk about the 4 or 5 leading indicators that matter the most.
This is a super critical insight, but I'm guessing it took, and I think everyone who's a marketer on this call is trying to figure out how do I map this to my own business. And I think the takeaway here is, if you can build sort of that growth engine where you can forecast these inputs lead to those outputs, you can really start driving much higher growth, much better investments by looking at the input metrics. And I think that's a mentality every marketer needs to embrace. But I'm guessing getting to that point, understanding your growth engine, figuring out what are the right leading indicators takes some time, right? So in your case, was it obvious right off the bat saying, here are the 5 leading indicators, boom, or did you iterate a little bit? Was it a bit of a struggle to figure out what the right ones were?
Oh, absolutely not. We did not nail this at all for the first few years. For the first few years, it was just throwing stuff against the wall, seeing if it stuck. And, now here we are, having raised, $140 million, and it looks like it was all inevitable. Like, as you guys all know, none of this is ever inevitable. Growth is incredibly calculated and risky. So no, and Vijay, I was also problematic, and I'd encourage all of you marketers and growth folk on the call to like call your CEOs out as well. Like, we're often wrong. Like CEOs, the boards we have aren't asking us for leading indicators. They're asking us for outputs of like MAUs, revenue, kind of cash burn. And so we're so predicated to think about the outputs from board meetings where, our jobs are on the line every single time, where the board's, one of their core jobs is to whether to retain or fire the CEO. And so CEOs are conditioned to be very focused on outputs. But you guys should bring them back. If that's the wrong focus, which often in marketing growth, 99% of times it is the wrong focus, it's a vanity output. Actually tell your CEO they're wrong. Like if they're kind of being annoying about the top line numbers, or that they're asking you the wrong questions, and actually you should be spending 99% of your meetings problem solving on leading indicators, which are less sexy, but are actually going to drive the numbers. I think great growth and marketing teams tell their CEOs that they're focused on the wrong things. And I know for sure that mine have taught me how to think about growth and marketing. It was definitely not the other way around. And so all I'm doing on this Zoom is telling you what my team constantly remind me, which is don't focus on the sexy stuff that you tell the press. You've got to focus on the unsexy inputs, because that's where the magic is. And so I've learned the hard way from having my ass kicked by my team multiple times. And they're right.
This is a fabulous insight. I think that insight alone probably makes this a worthwhile session for everyone. But we will keep digging for more. So I want to go back to something you said earlier about Netflix and the AI and the personalization, all of that. So really, I think in your space, I think going back to the idea that you're disrupting these human brokers in some sense, AI is almost an essential tool for you, because I think without that, you just cannot even be at par. Forget about trying to be better than these human brokers. So what is, in your case, obviously, you don't have the Netflix kind of recommendations, but what kind of recommendations have you guys seen? Are you guys really talking about new apartments that are coming in? Are you talking about matching the layouts? Like, walk us through what's working for you in terms of delivering that AI-driven experience.
Yeah, I'll oversimplify and then happy to get into details. So we use ML for two reasons. One is what listings we recommend to you, and the other one is how we re-engage you through the product. So the first one, whether it's in the product, whether it's in our emails to you, what listings do you see? If we send you similar listings in an email or on a detail page, AI determines what listings you see based on your behavior and based on the parameters of your search. So one is like Netflix, which is how do we send you similar movies? So how do we send you similar listings so you don't actually need to spend hours in the product? How can we make you actually spend less time in our product because we surface the right stuff to you? So that's one. Two is how we re-engage you. So this is on across various vectors, but the two most important are what time of day and on what device. So just like in my example from a few minutes ago, just because you first sent an email on Zumper at 7 p.m. on a Sunday on your iPhone doesn't necessarily mean that targeting you at 7 p.m. on your iPhone on a Monday evening and then on a Tuesday evening and then on a Wednesday evening is the right call. And so delivering personalized media of like understanding that our user actually on Sunday nights is on their phone watching like Westworld, but on Monday they want to be re-engaged on web on their desktop because they look at listings on their computer device, their work computer. That nuance is what AI and ML have allowed us to do. And typically with the ML, like most people think, oh, you create like batches and like, cohorts and segments, but we're able to get down to like the individual user's behavior. And so giving them better listings through a medium that they want at the right time of day is an oversimplification of how we use ML at Zumper.
Very interesting. No, very interesting. And obviously, when you're using that ML, you're using all of your customer data. I think you talked about really understanding your customers through the lens of what they do. Have you had discussions about what other data sources you can bring into the set? I know with, we encourage everyone to be highly privacy compliant and, really rely on data that's first party data obtained with consent and with trust. And looks like that's exactly what you're doing. I know some of the people in the industry also focus a lot more on third-party data, but have you had discussions about sort of the nature of data and the kind of experience and the privacy implication of that? And how do you make that like a delight instead of like a concern for your customers?
Yeah, so we've been super careful about privacy, even when you get to like the opportunity to create lookalike audiences on Facebook, and I know Facebook have actually toned down what you can actually do there. That's probably the furthest we've ever gone in terms of comparing our data to other people's and to get industry level stuff. There's a bunch of stuff that in our industry that credit card companies and financial industries want from us and would be able to give us in return. So we sit on a lot of like early economic signals of data that if a renter starts to search, they're kind of probably 45 days away from moving, which is a lot of people who can do stuff with that information. We've never shared it. We're very paranoid, and our CTO is very good at this about privacy. And I think in the early days before we built our database of users, it would have been beneficial to have some extra data to layer onto ours. I think now we have so many signals, given we'll touch 80 million Americans this year. So we'll have like 1 in 3 adults in America will do something on Zumper this year. That we haven't needed to go elsewhere to understand their behavior. But 3 years ago, we could have done something smart there. We just didn't for whatever reason. So I'd say we're now like self-sufficient. to get to self-sufficient, we've probably got here faster by leveraging third parties. We're a little paranoid about it in today's environment, and so we've never done it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, perfect. Maybe with that, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about today and the current environment. With COVID-19, real estate, apartment searching clearly has been one of the most impacted sectors. How did you mention everything you did with your team early on, but I would love to understand how that's affecting your business. How are you challenging your growth team to think differently? Everything that we just discussed, how do you apply that in today's context?
Yeah, so COVID for residential rentals is going to have two phases. The shelter-in-place phase is bad, really like slow for our industry as renters search, but they don't actually consummate their moves, which is when a lot of many of revenue events happen. But phase two, if there's when there is the recession, rentals are quite counter-cyclical. Landlords spend a lot of money in downturns, like filling their vacancies, either to cover their mortgage or to cover like debt covenants if they're a large landlord. And so actually, I think phase two will be probably quite good for our business in a weird way. There may also be pent-up demand that's released when shelter-in-place lifts. But even though we just raised our Series D, we hunkered down. And so one thing that we immediately did on the paid side is, whereas before we were always experimenting with paid channels and we allow for looser life cycles, we went to like ROAS, break even or positive on first session. Otherwise, we didn't spend money on it. And that cut our discretionary marketing budget in half overnight. So in March, we cut our marketing budget in half, and the only marketing that remains, we can guarantee it's at least break even on the first session. Now, that is an incredibly narrow definition, but these are the times where we want to be like ultra conservative. And so, it had an impact literally in the same week we moved to work from home. We cut a 6-figure number out of our monthly marketing budget.
Very interesting. No, I think this is another great insight for a lot of marketers on this call, because I think, oftentimes we think about budget cuts in the context of companies that are, maybe not well financed, but you guys are clearly very well financed. You guys are in a market which is pretty stable in the long run. But despite that, I think it makes sense for for a lot of CEOs to cut marketing spend at this time. And as you cut those marketing spend, you talked about sort of that return on ad spend positive on the first session. Now, even knowing that is necessitates sort of building a bit of an infrastructure, right? Because click comes in, you paid some money on that. By the time you really know something is break even, there's some bit of forecasting involved to figure out conversion rates and whatnot. So what is that infrastructure at Zumper? Have you guys built it in-house? Are you using Google Analytics or something like that, or the mix of all of that? How did you get to the point where you as a CEO and your CFO can look at that and say, great, we made the right adjustments, we can now be confident?
Yeah, the upside of Zumper is we're super quant. The downside is we've used so many different third-party tools to do this that sometimes there isn't one source of truth. So between like Google Analytics, Mixpanel, Optimizely, like the ad managers through Facebook, if it's a Facebook click, we have so many sources of truth that I don't think we've ever been excellent with that, and it's a frustration that we all have. If you think about, just to add to my reasons, like the reason we went to that single session attribution, it's not that we don't believe our lifetime value can't bake out to profitable, but it's about cash flow. If we pay for a click this month and we can monetize it this month, that's really good for cash flow. It's in COVID where we don't know how long it's going to last. If we pay for a click now, but we monetize that user at break even in 7 months, which in our industry is possible, even though in the long term of the company, if we had infinite money, that would be a good idea. Just right now, we are kind of like just optimizing for keeping our cash burn down now, because as you all know, it's a tough time. A lot of our friends have lost their jobs, like there's a lot of famous companies that go out of business in the next 6 months. And we just don't want to be one of them. And so we're being so skewed on this side. So I'd say in terms of the tools, we've used everything. And I think there are advantages to using everything, and then there are disadvantages not to having one source of truth. And I think it's something that all marketing teams struggle with. And I have no clever solution to that, because even though we also have our own data warehouse that underpins all of these tools, sometimes these tools still have better reporting than our own warehouse. So it's I'd say we're midway through figuring that out, but it's a common marketing challenge, and it's one that we have not solved.
Yeah, no, I hear that from a lot of people, and obviously building that single customer view and using that as the basis for this kind of attribution forecasting still remains a big challenge in the market, and obviously we are helping solve that to some extent, as are many other solutions. But this is already great. I think there's a ton of audience questions. I want to switch to those, but I think the big insight so far that I'm gleaning, number one, I think. You talked a lot about marketing being the extension of the product or the customer experience a lot. And I think that's going to be true for pretty much every company. I think everyone talks about digital transformation. And really, I think on the customer facing side, digital transformation really is about making marketing or the experience sort of extend into every channel. So I would say that's number one. Number two, I think one of my big takeaways is really about the kind of metrics you sort of use, and it's fascinating to see how you have switched to a lot of leading metrics, and I think that's a big insight. Very interesting to think about how do you run run your growth team, think about input metrics, leading metrics, and obviously have a machinery, have a framework that can map those leading metrics into output metrics, use some good attribution. And again, I think the other insight related to COVID-19 is that once you have that framework and you know the inputs, you can dial the knobs up and down, you can make adjustments, spend adjustments, which are short term, and as soon as the economy starts picking back up, you can dial some of those things back. So that's a great insight. And maybe number three, I think you talked about transforming that broker driven industry and you using AI and ML. And obviously we have done a lot of work with you at Blueshift. We have done a lot of work with you in that area where the recommendations for emails, push, everything is super personalized. But really, I think, talking to you, it feels like that's almost essential. That's not, it's not even like a nice to have. If you are trying to even compete in a market where, your alternative is a human being who can really understand me, you have to, at the very least, offer these capabilities. So I think those are my insights so far, but I'm sure there are more once we get into some more questions from the audience. So let's jump to that. Let me look at maybe look at a few questions that have come up, and really, I think one of the questions is really about obviously this one's about Blueshift. So somebody is asking that the online housing and rental market is very competitive, right? And obviously you guys have succeeded in that. And what has been a key differentiator of the tools you've used, including Blueshift, that have helped you, keep up your competitive edge in that space?
Yeah. So actually, yeah. Bizarrely, you think other existing companies would be good at this, but the kind of recommendation engines of most companies are kind of dumb ones, like ours was as well. Just to be clear, where they're not tailored and at the right time of day. So actually, like really something as simple as like ML-based re-engagement has had a massive impact. The unsexy thing in our platform has been listings. So we also use ML and Blueshift and other tools on actually engaging landlords. And because we're a marketplace, supply is actually being more important to us than demand, because supply begets demand. You need supply first.
Yeah.
So actually we've used ML actually also to re-engage landlords to make sure we bring them back at the right time of year and back onto the platform. One other thing I think Zumper's got really good at, and it relates to one of the other questions that was asked that I can see in the window, is driving phone calls. So we used to hate phone calls because we can't track them. We use Twilio to track them, but there's always gremlins in the system. But phone calls in our industry convert twice as well as emails. So if you call a landlord, you're twice more likely to sign a lease as if you email a landlord, because in emails, especially in hot properties, they just stack up in a CRM or in a Gmail account, and people don't get back to them. So we've actually used Blueshift, Twilio, and some SMS stuff, which is another one of the questions, to drive phone call engagement. So even sometimes to the extent that someone on a Blueshift alert or on our website will contact a property through email, and then if they don't hear back and we're able to proxy the email responses, we could text them actually a day later saying, hey, if you haven't heard back, which it looks like you haven't, here's the phone number of the property, give them a call. And that has been a breakthrough way to differentiate, because it sounds crazy, but as you all know, millennials don't really want to make phone calls. They want to email. And yet at the same time, phone calls in our world convert significantly better. So as a text and SMS has been a way to get millennials off sending messages on our platform, actually to call our proxied phone numbers to speak to landlords directly. So that's not something other platforms were doing, and moving millennials from passive pinging emails out to actually more active engagement on the phone has been quite a big win in a competitive market.
Very, very interesting. No, that's super fascinating. And tomorrow, I think there's a session on winning multi-channel strategy. So as you think about combining all these different channels and figuring out, obviously not bombarding your customers with too much, but using these channels judiciously, using the right mix. There's a great session tomorrow with some great panelists. So encourage everyone to attend that. There's another question, and for about some of the qualitative and quantitative metrics you use, and I think you've covered some of the quantitative ones. You talked about the leading indicators and the SEO rankings and things like that. Is there anything qualitative, and also does that lead to how you manage sort of creative marketing ideas, especially at a time like this?
Yeah, so on the qualitative side, we're less resourced, as we mentioned. Like literally, we spend far more time, for better or worse, and there's a downside of doing this on the quant. So in the qualitative side, it's still kind of expressed through numbers, but it's much more qualitative and feel. We check sentiment, so online sentiment, kind of on social media using kind of third-party tools, and we run NPS, so we constantly know what our rolling NPS is. The sentiment one's an interesting one, which I think most brands are probably obsessed with as well. For us, it's weird because most of our online sentiment is around rent data, and a lot of rent data, which is what we're really good at in terms of content marketing, is negative. So it's like, crap, like San Francisco rents are up like another 10% this quarter. And so it's kind of a really challenging one for us, because it's positioning our brand as an objective source of truth. But often the press don't write the good story of, hey, Houston rents are down 4%. The much clickbaitier story is, crap, Houston rents are up 8% this month. And so a challenge we have, so we do track qualitative sentiment. For us, it's been challenging because how does that affect your view on your brand? That you were successful in creating your brand as an authority, but the sentiment attached with the data is negative. So we track qualitative, but it's tricky when you don't have the brand halo of brand marketing alongside it as well. So in general, I'd say our brand is very neutral, and it actually comes across in the product, and I think it needs to be less neutral. Like our average user is a 28-year-old woman. We should be telling her story. You know, she's financially independent. She's pursuing her career. She doesn't want to settle down. Like, that's the story we should be telling. That doesn't quite come across. When we do have the opportunity to tell it through a bit of product marketing, that's where the brand sentiment we do track does pick up. It's just never sustained because we've never put the budget behind it. So much stronger on the quant side. Brand on the qualitative side, it's online brand, NPS, and we look for like branded searches in Google Trends as just a proxy for brand awareness.
No, makes a ton of sense. And talking about sort of today's time, you talked about sort of the changes you made to your paid media spend, but talk a little bit about new ideas that you're trying out, which are different in this time, because when I look at our own marketing, obviously this event is part of our marketing, right? And this got put together in less than a month. Our team sort of, we challenge them to be creative, lean on great partners like yourselves, and that's something we are doing slightly different in our marketing in some sense. What are some things you guys are doing differently? What is your team thinking about? What can we, and if there's stuff that hasn't been announced or released yet, is there anything that you can talk about which might be coming up soon?
Yeah. Well, first of all, kudos to your team. Yeah, this has been quick. And I think most of you on the line probably feel, it's really hard to imagine any of us are going to be in a conference hall for a very long time, let alone a plane. So I think this is the beginning of conferences, which is good. It's a level playing field. It doesn't matter whether you're in Silicon Valley or Delhi or London. Online is so much better. In terms of us, I think the unique opportunity we have is around product marketing right now. So if you imagine like we're the only real rental platform in the US that can digitally close your lease and transaction, and we can do a lot of apartment rentals unseen because we have a lot of video and Matterport tours. So a lot of renters on our platform can actually like tour something online and then actually submit an application to the landlord and a deposit and then pay their landlord their rent all through the platform, which in a world of shelter in place where no one can tour in person, no one wants to touch paper and like wet ink, is like perfect. So Vijay, in our world, and actually we're announcing something this week, e-commerce for apartment rentals is the single biggest thing we have an opportunity to win on during COVID. So Zumper's unique opportunity in the next 3 months is product marketing.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's fantastic. So everyone, you heard that first on this session, and I'm looking forward to a lot of exciting wins from Zumper in that area. With that, I think, maybe I'll ask Ant to just think about the last one or two, closing remarks or thoughts that you have based on this discussion. I know we were able to get through most of the audience questions, but I don't know if we'll have time for all, but if you want to take a quick scan at any remaining audience questions, share any nuggets that you might want to share with the audience, that'll be great. And then we could switch to some of the logistics and the notes for tomorrow.
Great. Yeah, a couple of questions that we didn't get to. So one was about ML, building it in-house versus outsourcing it. So we did both. We actually ran a bake-off, and I think you know this, Vijay. We ran a bake-off between Zumper's ML, Blueshift's ML, and actually a third party in Europe's ML engine for recommendations. And actually Blueshift and Zumper ended up being the two winners, but we used Blueshift for some stuff, but then actually in-house for other stuff. So there's some stuff that where Blueshift, it just has better pattern recognition because of all the data they have across vendors. They're just going to be better than us at. But then when we have on-site conversion data, it tends to mean we're better at that stuff because we just have more depth. So it's a great question. It's probably an unsatisfactory answer, but we use Zumper ML for some stuff, mainly around listing recommendations. And we use Blueshift ML and AI for other stuff, mainly around the channels we engage our renters on. So Blueshift one on one, Zumper one on the other. It's a great question, and we have no ambition to.
It's not build or buy. It's a combination build and buy. Yeah, and I think I'm hearing that more and more from people in the industry.
Totally.
Some areas you have deep domain expertise, and you just cannot outsource those. But you also don't want to build like 1,000 people, AI ML organization. Yeah.
And in terms of general thoughts, I mean, like I've seen the attendee list here, so everyone here is a sophisticated marketer. I think like. There's a lot of VCs who like tweet this, but I think that it's kind of true that like be super demanding in these times of your CEOs, of your teams. Like there's really no time for like okay performance. And like, we've struggled, like every company, Zumper's always been like we mainly have A players, but sometimes you have B players and sometimes B players hire C players. I think there's just in today's environment where all of our companies, almost all are negatively impacted by COVID. Some are not, and like kudos to you guys. But in this environment, whether you're crushing it or you're struggling, like I think there's no room for like ambiguity or kind of hope. Like it has to be quantifiably like true. And so I think being super demanding and objective now is even more important than it was before, because your CEO is definitely, she or he is under pressure right now. And this is where great marketing teams are born, and you'll see on your teams who's got it and who doesn't. And I'd be pretty regimented about demanding like a new level, whether it's ROAS, brand awareness, conversion. Like this is actually the time not to go easy on the team, but actually to demand the next level, because this is where the best companies are built. All of the best companies are built during downturns because they focus on what matters and they hire brilliant people who are available. And this is an opportunity for your companies to be that amazing next level brand that we all want to be. And this is where they're going to get built. So I know how hard stuff is. It's hard for us. I know it's hard for everyone. The silver lining is this is also when like greatness is built, and this is the time to go for it.
Fantastic. No, that's a great parting thought. And thank you for sharing all of your insights. I've enjoyed this discussion immensely, and I'm sure our attendees have too. A couple of quick notes. we have our winner for the Uber Eats gift card, and I hope I'm saying this right. It's Adeyemi Adeloye from Freedom Finance. So congratulations. We have one for one winner every day, and our team will reach out to you with the details of that. We will be back tomorrow at the same time. Tomorrow's session features marketers from Tuft & Needle. I think we talked about that briefly earlier, considered purchase, Groupon, and ClearScore, which is sort of the credit rating for UK, and great companies, all three of them, great marketers, great panel. All of them will be sharing their insights on winning strategies for multi-channel marketing. Anthemos touched on that just a little bit when he talked about using phone, SMS, email, push in conjunction with each other, but there will be a lot more discussion on that tomorrow, so don't miss out. On that note, we will sign off for today. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everyone who attended, and look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.